Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a fascinating stack of material you sent us, really digging into, well, faith. A huge concept, obviously.
Absolutely, and often misunderstood.
Right. So today we're diving deep into the sources, mostly biblical narrative, theological takes, looking at two really big questions. First, how much faith do you actually need?
Mm.
And second, this idea that faith and science are somehow enemies. Does it really have to be that way?
Yeah, that's the mission today. We want to unpack these sources and, honestly, challenge some common ideas, like the idea that faith needs this monumental effort, or that if your prayer isn't answered like snap, it's your fault.
That you just didn't believe hard enough. Yeah, that one's tough.
It is. So we want to see what the sources actually say about where trust fits in. Let's maybe start with Acts 14. It gives a really concrete picture.
Okay, Acts 14. Paul and Barnabas are in Lystra, and Paul sees a man crippled from birth. The text says Paul looked intently at him
Yeah, really focused.
and saw he had faith to be made well. Then he tells him to stand up, and boom, the guy's walking.
It's a powerful moment. Paul perceives the faith. It's visible, actionable, leads to this instant miracle.
But that perception, that visibility, that's where things get tricky, right?
Yeah.
It fuels that idea that faith is this thing you have to, like, stockpile, enough units of faith.
Exactly. And that leads straight into what our material calls the abuse of faith. The terrible implication that if the miracle doesn't happen, the problem's you. You're deficient somehow.
Which the sources clearly argue against.
Strongly. So if it's not about having this massive visible quantity, what is it? Jesus tackles this head on in Luke 17.
Right, the apostles come to him and basically say, we need more, Lord, increase our faith. They're thinking quantity too.
They are. And Jesus' answer just demolishes that whole quantity argument. He says, look, if you had faith like a grain of mustard seed,
Which everyone knew was like the smallest seed imaginable.
tiny,
Yeah.
almost nothing. It says that much faith is enough. Enough to tell a mulberry tree, get this, be uprooted and planted in the sea.
Okay, hold on. A mustard seed is tiny, almost invisible faith. But Paul saw the man's faith in Acts. How do those connect? And why a mulberry tree? Seems specific.
It is specific. Think about that image. Jesus didn't say, move that pebble. The sources point out the mulberry tree was known for having one of the deepest, most stubborn root systems around.
Okay, so he picks the most entrenched, immovable problem.
Exactly. To show that the size of your faith isn't the point, even the smallest amount of trust placed correctly can tackle the absolute biggest, most deep-rooted issues.
So it's about the object of the faith, not the volume of it.
Precisely. It completely undercuts the need for some, Herculean belief effort on our part.
Okay, that shifts things. It's not about quantity. It's about context, placement. But then why the difference in timing? Why are some prayers answered instantly, like the man in Lystra, and others seem to take forever, or maybe don't happen the way we expect?
Right. So we move from how much faith to the context and maybe the timing of God's response.
This gets into God's will, doesn't it?
It does. James talks about asking according to God's will. That's kind of the framework. The tricky part, obviously, is we don't always have a clear map of what God's specific will is in every single situation.
And maybe our own motives get in the way. The material mentions something called narcissistic prayer.
Yeah, that's a strong term, but it gets at something important. Narcissism is when your world revolves around you. If prayer becomes purely, my will be done, fix my problem, give me the win, right now we're forgetting the bigger picture.
That God's running the universe, not just managing my life.
Exactly. Sometimes what looks like the best, quickest fix of the instant answer might actually cause problems elsewhere. Or maybe it short-circuits a process we need to go through.
Which leads right into that stump removal analogy. I like that one.
Me too. So you've got this big old deep-rooted tree stump. How do you get rid of it?
Well, you could bring in a backhoe. Quick, powerful, yank it right out.
Right. Bam. Gone. That's the instantaneous miracle. Option one.
Or you could get out the axe and shovel.
Ugh. Yeah. Hard work. Tedious. Takes maybe months. That's option two. Sometimes God uses the backhoe. Sometimes, though, the sources suggest the axe and shovel method is deliberate.
Why?
Maybe to let our existing faith, even that mustard seed faith, get stretched, grow stronger through the actual work, the persistence.
Okay, makes sense. But there was a third way. The dynamite.
Ah, yes. Dynamite. Option three, gets the stuff out instantly for sure. But it might blow up half the yard too. Collateral damage. The sources use this to suggest that sometimes An instant explosive fix might actually wreck other things, a family situation, a career path.
So the slower, harder process might actually be God protecting things, even if it feels frustrating to us.
That's the idea. So true faith, according to this view, involves accepting God's time frame and God's chosen method, backhoe, shovel, whatever, even while we're still asking for healing, for deliverance, for the win. We can still ask for the backhoe.
But accept the shovel if that's what arrives. Okay. That's a very different posture. Now let's go back to Acts 14 for a second. Paul saw the man had faith to be made well. You mentioned a specific Greek word there.
Yes, sozo. It's translated well or healed in that context because the man physically gets up and walks. But sozo usually translates as salvation.
Oh, interesting. So it means both, saved and healed.
It encompasses both.
Mm.
It's about rescue, deliverance, wholeness.
Yeah.
Paul saw the man had faith to be sozoed, saved, rescued. And in this case, that rescue manifested physically. It shows the spiritual and physical weren't seen as separate buckets.
That's a really key point. The sources push back against splitting those two.
Heavily. Look at the story of the paralytic in Mark 2. His friends tear open a roof to lower him down to Jesus. Why?
For physical healing, they wanted him to walk.
Right. But what's the very first thing Jesus says to him? Not get up and walk.
He says, "My son, your sins are forgiven," which must have caused a stir.
Huge stir. The religious leaders were thinking, whoa, only God can forgive sins. Jesus immediately links the spiritual state sin with the physical need.
And then he proves his authority covers both domains.
Exactly. He basically says, which is easier, to say sins forgiven or get up and walk, just so you know I can do both. Then he tells the man, rise, take up your bed, and walk.
Wow. So the argument is this Western idea of separating salvation, saving your soul for later, from healing, fixing your body now, isn't really biblical.
That's what these sources contend.
Mm-hmm.
God's purpose is to sozo us, to rescue us, yes, from hell ultimately, but also from the effects of the curse, like sickness and brokenness, right here, right now.
Yeah.
It's holistic.
Okay, this holistic view, this sozo, it sets us up perfectly for the final piece, faith and science, because
Okay.
the common narrative today is pick one.
You got to choose. Faith or science. Can't have both. Yeah, it's everywhere.
But these sources say, hold on.
They absolutely refute that dichotomy. Go back to Acts 14 again. Paul and Barnabas are turning the crowd away from worshiping them, pointing to the living God who made the heavens and the earth. And crucially, Paul says God did not leave himself without a witness.
And what is that witness?
Paul clarifies in Romans 1, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived. How? Ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made.
So the universe itself, creation is the witness.
The created world, the cosmos, everything we can observe and study, that's the witness.
Now, the material makes a really sharp distinction here that I think is vital. Say it again.
Right. Science, the process of science, does not deny God. Now, scientists might, based on their own philosophy, but that's different. The method itself isn't inherently atheistic.
Okay, so how do they relate then, science and faith?
Think about the questions they ask. Science is our method for observing the world, finding patterns, figuring out the rules, gravity, thermodynamics, biology. Science asks how? How does this work? How did this come about?
And faith, or theology, looks at the same world, the same laws.
And asks why? Why is there something rather than nothing? And who? Is there an intelligence, a purpose behind these consistent laws?
That consistency is key, isn't it? Science itself relies on the universe having fixed laws. If gravity worked differently every Tuesday, you couldn't do science.
Exactly. The very foundation of science assumes an orderly, rational universe governed by dependable rules. That assumption, the sources argue, points towards a lawgiver and intelligence. Things aren't chaotic.
So the position isn't faith versus science, but maybe faith in God and faith in the scientific process as a way of understanding God's creation.
That's a good way to put it. Trust in God, the source of the order, and trust in the observable, repeatable findings of science about how that order works. Neither God nor Paul seems to reject the study of the natural world.
The material even mentions some modern thinkers who explore this, right? To connect the dots intellectually.
Yeah, briefly. Figures like John Lennox, the mathematician from Oxford. Looks like Churchill, apparently. He argues that mathematics and the complexity of the universe actually point towards intelligence, not away from it.
And Stephen Meyer.
With Darwin's doubt, yeah. He digs into the probabilities and the information needed for life, arguing the math for purely random evolution faces significant challenges.
And even David Berlinski, who I think is maybe secular or agnostic.
Right. Even he acknowledges the incredible fine-tuning of the universe and the mathematical hurdles for some theories, exploring alternatives like the multiverse, trying to explain that order without a designer.
So you have people from different starting points grappling with the same data, showing that faith and rigorous science aren't necessarily oppositional. They're asking different layers of questions about the same reality.
Exactly. And it brings us right back to that final verse in Acts 14 we glanced at. After Paul preached this integrated message, God the Creator, witness in nature, verse 18 says, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifices to them.
Wow. Even after all that, the old ways of thinking were hard to shake.
Incredibly hard. It's a reminder that changing where people place their fundamental trust, whether it's in old rituals or maybe in a rigid belief that science has disproven God, that's always a challenge. It takes time, patience.
Okay, let's recap the big shifts from the sources then. First, faith isn't measured by mountain-moving effort, but by mustard seed trust. The focus is on who you trust, not how hard you trust.
Right. Second, God's salvation, sozo, is bigger than we often think. It's holistic about rescuing us in the here and now, body and soul, not just storing up souls for later.
And third, science and faith aren't enemies. They ask different questions about the same orderly universe. Science asks how, faith asks why and who. Both rely on that underlying order. Okay. So here's something for you, our listener, to think about. Building on that last point from Acts. They scarcely restrain people from their old sacrifices. In your own life, what deep-rooted belief or assumption maybe it is about needing huge faith? Or maybe it's that science pushes out the divine. What idea have you been most resistant to having uprooted, even when faced with a different perspective? What might that resistance tell you about where your ultimate trust really lies?
That's a deep one to ponder. And definitely check out those writers we mentioned, Lennox, Meyer, Berlinski, if you want to explore the faith and science connection further. Thanks for diving deep with us today.